Ladies and gentlemen, most people sleepwalk through life, trapped in routines, overwhelmed by regrets, and silently suffering from a lack of purpose. But what if this was the year you finally woke up? What if this moment right now became the turning point? In this speech, we're going to solve the root problem that holds you back: unconscious living. This is the call to wake up, to reclaim your power, rewrite your story, and start living a life that actually feels like your own. There comes a moment in every human life, a quiet, sacred pause, when you look around and wonder, is this it? The rush, the routine, the roles you play, the masks you wear, the goals you chase. Yet somewhere deep inside, something stirs, a whisper, a knowing that you were meant for more. This isn't a motivational high to hype you up. This is a gentle but firm awakening, a mirror held to your soul. This is the call to come home to yourself, not tomorrow, not someday, now. Wake up and change your life. The journey of transformation doesn't begin with action. It doesn't begin with a plan, a checklist, or a goal written on your wall. It begins with a subtle yet profound awakening, a moment of clarity, however brief, where you see yourself with unfiltered honesty. This is awareness, and it is the foundation upon which all meaningful change is built. Awareness is not about guilt. It is not about judging where you are or how long you've been there. It is simply about noticing the patterns that repeat themselves, noticing the thoughts that dominate your inner world, noticing where your life feels aligned and where it feels quietly suffocating. It is the willingness to pause and witness the truth without trying to explain it away. Most people live asleep in their own lives, not because they are lazy or indifferent, but because the pace of the world has numbed them. Their attention is fragmented, their hearts are guarded. Their energy is buried under layers of distraction, fear, and unconscious habits. You wake up in the morning, and before you even speak to yourself kindly, you're already reacting to the noise of the world, the notifications, the news, the expectations. You forget to ask, what do I feel? What do I need? Who am I becoming? True awareness invites you back to yourself. It gently pulls your attention away from the outside and draws it inward. You begin to see that the external chaos is often a reflection of the internal confusion. You start realizing that your environment, your relationships, your work, even your health, they all carry the fingerprints of your thinking. And your thinking is shaped by what you're conscious of. When you begin to cultivate awareness, you're not just noticing problems. You're awakening to patterns. You start to see how you speak to yourself when no one's listening. You start to feel how your energy shifts in the presence of certain people. You begin to question why certain fears always show up when you try something new. This kind of self-inquiry isn't indulgent, it's essential. Without awareness, you're not really living. You're reacting. You're moving through each day on autopilot, governed by routines that no longer serve you and stories that no longer define you. You're chasing goals that once meant something, but no longer spark anything. You're doing things because they're familiar, not because they're aligned. And the truth is, comfort zones can feel safe, but they're rarely honest. Awareness is what shines the light on the corners of your life that you've avoided. It shows you where you've outsourced your power, compromised your truth, or shrunk to fit someone else's idea of who you should be. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it often begins with a quiet discomfort, a whisper that says, there's more to you than this. But that discomfort is sacred. That unrest is not a flaw in your life. It's a signal from your soul. It's your higher self trying to get your attention. And if you ignore it, life has a way of amplifying that whisper until it becomes a roar. Once you begin to see, you cannot unsee. You start recognizing that every single moment offers you feedback if you're paying attention. That persistent feeling of burnout might not be about your schedule. It might be about your boundaries. That low-grade dissatisfaction might not be about your job. It might be about your purpose. That constant inner resistance might not be about fear. It might be about misalignment. But you won't know until you become aware. Awareness doesn't demand that you fix everything overnight. It simply asks that you notice. To be present enough to ask what is really happening here, and then to trust what you find, even if it doesn't make sense yet. To stop assuming that life is random, and to start seeing the patterns that are guiding you back to your own power. The greatest shifts don't come from force, they come from clarity. And clarity comes from paying attention. Attention to your words, to your emotions, to the quiet tug of intuition you keep ignoring, to the recurring lessons that life keeps sending your way. Because life will always reflect your level of awareness. When you raise it, everything else begins to shift in response. People change, choices evolve, paths reveal themselves, doors open that were once invisible, but only when you wake up enough to see them. You may not realize it yet, but you are living in a house that your thoughts have built. Every experience, every pattern, every emotional cycle, these are not random occurrences. They are extensions of the thinking you carry within you. You are not just reacting to life, you are actively creating it, moment by moment, through the energy of your thoughts. Thought is not something passive. It is not just a cloud floating through your mind, harmless and neutral. Thought is energy. It carries a frequency. It plants seeds. It starts movements in your inner world, which ripple outward into your outer world. If you could see how a single belief shapes your mood, then your mood shapes your behavior, and then your behavior shapes your results, you would never take another thought lightly again. Your reality is not the product of luck or accident. It is the product of where your focus lives. If you keep thinking, I can't, life will reflect more of what proves you right. If you keep telling yourself nothing ever changes, then nothing does. But it's not because you're cursed, it's because your mind is constantly seeking confirmation of what it already believes. This is not a flaw, it's how your mind is wired. It protects what is familiar, even if the familiar is unhealthy. Until you make the unfamiliar safe, you will always return to what is known, even if it's painful. So many people try to change their circumstances without first changing their consciousness. They want new results but carry old thinking. They want freedom but still think like someone trapped. They want love but believe they're unworthy. They want peace but speak in worry. And they wonder why the change doesn't last. It's because they're treating the symptom, not the source. We are taught to believe in action, in hustle, in chasing, forcing, and fixing. But thought is the root. Action is just the branch. If the root is poisoned with fear, with scarcity, with self-doubt, then no matter how much effort you put in, the fruit of your labor will still carry the imprint of that energy. But when the root is healthy, when your thinking is aligned, when your beliefs empower you, when your inner voice supports you, your actions flow from clarity, not desperation. The source is thought. It is the invisible script running underneath your life. You may not hear it out loud, but it is always there. And here's the most important truth. You are not your thoughts, but your thoughts shape what you believe you deserve. They influence what you reach for and what you walk away from. They influence what you tolerate and what you demand. They influence what you tolerate and what you demand. They influence how you interpret events, how you treat others, and how you see yourself when no one else is watching. You become what you consistently think about. This is not a poetic concept, it's spiritual law. If your dominant thoughts are about fear, you will find reasons to fear. If your dominant thoughts are about lack, you will find yourself in situations of scarcity. But if your thoughts shift toward possibility, if they begin to align with faith, purpose, and truth, you'll start noticing new opportunities where before you only saw limitations. It's not about thinking positive just for the sake of it. It's about thinking truthfully. Most negative thoughts are not based on reality. They're based on outdated programming. Stories that were handed down to you, messages you absorbed as a child, words that were spoken to you when you were too young to understand that you had the right to reject them. Now those thoughts live in the background, shaping your decisions as if they're facts when they're just assumptions. You have to start becoming the observer of your mind. Don't just listen to your thoughts, question them. Ask where they came from. Ask if they're serving your highest self. Ask if they're based in fear or in freedom. When you pause long enough to do this, you begin to loosen their grip. And in that space, you get to choose differently. Thought is the first creation. Before a book is written, it was a thought. Before a house is built, it was a thought. Before a new life path begins, it is first imagined in the privacy of your own mind. You are always creating, even when you think you're stuck. Stuckness is also created by recycled thoughts and unchallenged beliefs. But when you start telling a new story, even if it feels unfamiliar, you begin to interrupt the old rhythm. And from that place, everything starts to move again. What you tell yourself every day matters more than what anyone else has ever told you, because you hear your own voice more than anyone else's. And if that voice becomes your ally, your life becomes your mirror. You don't need to force change. You need to think the kind of thoughts that inspire you to rise naturally into that change. Thoughts of trust, thoughts of grace, thoughts of power, thoughts that reflect the truth of who you really are. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the old story no longer fits. It begins quietly, like a faint tug in the chest or a whisper behind the noise of your daily life. You feel it not because something is wrong, but because something within you is ready to evolve. The discomfort you feel is not punishment, it's an invitation. It's your spirit calling you to release the identity you've been clinging to so tightly. The story you tell yourself about who you are, what you can do, and what you're worthy of is not set in stone. It was written through years of experiences, many of which you didn't choose, and some of which you outgrew long ago. You are not your mistakes. You are not the failure someone once labeled you. You are not the rejection, the heartbreak, the breakdown, or the lost opportunity. Yet you might still be living through that lens, reacting to life as if you're still that person in that place, carrying that pain. The story feels safe because it's familiar. Even suffering can become a comfort zone if it's all you've known. But familiarity does not equal truth, and when you mistake repetition for identity, you stay trapped in cycles that no longer serve the person you're becoming. Your old story was born out of survival. It was created to make sense of the chaos, to find meaning in the pain, to protect you from more hurt. At the time, it served a purpose. It allowed you to function. But healing requires more than survival. It requires expansion, and expansion demands that you stop telling the story that keeps you small. Every time you say, "That's just the way I am," you reinforce a limitation. Every time you say things like "That don't happen to people like me," you deny yourself new possibility. These aren't facts, they are patterns. Patterns become beliefs, and beliefs become the walls you build around your life. But walls that protect also confine. And before you know it, you're not living anymore. You're maintaining a version of yourself that no longer reflects your truth. To detach from the old story is not to forget what happened. It's to stop identifying with the meaning you assign to it. You are not the abandoned child. You are not the chronic failure. You are not the one who always gets overlooked, always loses, always settles. Those were moments. They were chapters. But you are the author, and the author is never bound by the paragraph they wrote last year. You don't need permission to change. You don't need an apology to move forward. You only need to see clearly that your identity is not fixed. You have the power to evolve, not because you are broken, but because you are growing. You are allowed to become someone new without explaining yourself to people who are attached to the older version of you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to rewrite your own role, even if others don't understand the plot twist. The mind will resist change because it fears the unknown. It will try to pull you back into the old narrative, even when it hurts, simply because it knows how it ends. But your soul isn't interested in predictable endings. It longs for truth. And the truth is, you were never meant to live inside the opinions of others, inside the shadows of old wounds, inside a version of yourself that you created in pain. The truth is, you are infinite. And the moment you stop repeating who you were, you create space for who you are. Transformation doesn't come from fighting the old story. It comes from no longer feeding it. It comes from becoming so grounded in the present that the past no longer feels like home. It comes from building a new relationship with yourself, one that's rooted in compassion, not criticism, in power, not pity. The old story may knock at your door, especially when you're tired or scared or uncertain. It will ask to be remembered. It will ask you to doubt your progress. It will try to convince you that change is impossible. But the more you stay awake, the less power it has. The more you align with truth, the more the false narratives begin to dissolve. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to be willing to stop telling the story that says you never will. You need to stop speaking from your wounds and start speaking from your wisdom. You need to stop waiting for evidence and start acting from faith. Because the story you tell today is shaping the life you will live tomorrow. And if that story is rooted in limitation, your life will reflect it. But if it's rooted in freedom, in vision, in truth, then you will rise beyond anything your old self believed was possible. There is a silent epidemic that few recognize, but nearly everyone lives with. It's the quiet erosion of our days, one unconscious choice at a time. A life on autopilot. You wake up, you go through the motions, and before you even realize it, weeks, months, even years have slipped through your fingers. It isn't that you didn't try, it's that you didn't choose consciously. Living habitually has become the norm for most people, but living intentionally is the way back to presence, to purpose, to peace. Habits are not the enemy. Many habits serve us. The habit of brushing your teeth, of preparing a healthy meal, of walking in nature. These are rituals of care. But when habits become substitutes for conscious awareness, when they dull your ability to feel, to choose, to grow, then they become barriers to a truly awakened life. The tragedy is not in the habit itself. It's in being unaware that your life is being shaped by patterns you didn't consciously choose. The human mind craves rhythm. It's wired to repeat what's familiar. Subconscious mind, the same inner dialogue looping again and again like a background song you didn't ask to hear. The challenge arises when your life becomes a mirror of those unconscious loops. You start confusing movement with progress. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're aligned. Just because you're occupied doesn't mean you're awake. To live intentionally means to slow down enough to ask yourself, why am I doing this? It means questioning the automatic yes, the habitual no, the cycles of overthinking, overgiving, overcommitting. It means shifting your energy from reaction to response, from impulse to presence. Most people respond to life only when it demands their attention. A crisis wakes them up. A breakdown jolts them into reflection. A painful loss forces them to reassess. But what if you didn't need pain to become conscious? What if you chose awareness before life had to shake you awake? Intentional living is a radical act of self-respect. It says, my life matters too much to live it by default. It doesn't mean you have to control everything. It means you no longer sleepwalk through your days. It means your actions are led by vision, not just momentum. It means you stop asking what's next and start asking what's right for me. When you live habitually, your mind leads. It calculates, protects, categorizes, and reacts. But when you live intentionally, your soul takes the lead. And the soul doesn't rush. It doesn't need external validation. It knows how to listen deeply. It trusts the silence. It honors the pause. It reminds you that being busy is not the same as being fulfilled. Intentional living begins the moment you reclaim your time from things that do not nourish your spirit. It begins the moment you notice what drains you and choose to stop feeding it. It begins when you wake up each morning and ask not just, what do I need to do, but who do I want to be as I do it? When your choices align with your truth, even the ordinary becomes sacred. Living intentionally is not always grand. It often looks quiet, saying no to what doesn't feel right, turning off the noise and sitting in stillness, choosing to speak with kindness instead of reactivity, creating space before responding, catching a negative thought before it becomes a belief. These choices are subtle, but they are powerful. They are the bricks that build a life rooted in awareness instead of avoidance. You cannot live a different life unless you first think in a different way. But thinking differently requires you to see differently. You begin to notice where your habits came from. Did they come from love or from fear? From freedom or from survival? From conditioning or from your own clarity? Not every habit is yours to keep. Some were handed down, some were inherited, some were borrowed out of necessity. But now you are free to choose, not react, choose. You are not here to repeat the past. You are here to respond to the present with full presence, to live with your eyes open, to hear your own inner yes and no, to follow what feels aligned even when it makes no sense to others. When you live with intention, life begins to speak to you in new ways. It becomes less about outcomes and more about alignment, less about proving and more about living from truth. And truth, once honored, begins to dissolve confusion. The fog clears, the weight lifts, and what once felt like a heavy existence begins to feel like your own sacred path unfolding in real time. You were never meant to drift through this life disconnected, disempowered, or dimmed by past stories. You were born with an inner compass, a quiet but unwavering truth that always points you back to who you are beneath the noise, beyond the pain, and behind the habits. The question is no longer whether you are capable of change. The question is whether you are willing to wake up and remember what's already within you. This awakening isn't a moment of sudden transformation. It's a daily decision to return to awareness, to choose presence over patterns, to speak to yourself with compassion instead of criticism, to hold your power not as something you chase, but as something you reclaim. You do not need to wait for a new year, a new relationship, or a new opportunity to feel alive. You can start right now by noticing your breath, by paying attention to your thoughts, by detaching from the story that says you're not enough, and by moving through life not in fear, but with deep grounded intention. Because the truth is, this life is yours. This moment is yours. And when you finally wake up to that truth, everything begins to change, not because the world around you shifts, but because you do. The real change was never out there. It was always waiting for you to come home to yourself.